This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, Show 23.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, David Majetic. Ramsey's currently listening to 4 podcasts. One of his favorites is Jocko Podcast. Check it out. Hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, SE Nation, and welcome to another show. This is Show 23 of the We the Sales Engineers Podcast. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you guys wanting to spend time with listening to my disturbing voice, but I appreciate it. Some housekeeping before we get into the interview. I have a webinar coming out on the 29th of September, and it's not coming out, it's going to be live, basically, and it's geared towards folks who are not sales engineers and want to break into that role. So if you're in that boat, you can go onto the website, wethesalesengineers.com, click on webinars and register to be there and let people know that it's going to be there. It is limited to 50 people because that's the way Zoom works, at least for now. So sign up and look forward to talking to you guys. Today's guest is David Majetic, and this was an awesome conversation. I say that on every show, but I really enjoy all my conversations so far. It's amazing how talking to other sales engineers, salespeople, whatever it is, whoever it is that I'm talking to, just you learn a lot, and I learned a lot from David. I enjoyed the conversation, and the focus of today's conversation, although David has been on the job for a long time, we talked about how to break into sales engineering, right? His experiences doing it, the way he interviews other people. I share some of my experiences. So by all means, have a listen. And if you like the show, rate it, review it, all that. That helps other people find it. So if you're a new sales engineer and you know other sales engineers who want, other folks who are not sales engineers and want to be sales engineers, share the show with them. Maybe it'll help them as well. So without further ado, this is David. Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And sorry it took so long to lock this date down, but here we are.
Yeah, well, it happens. You know what? Career or your current job comes first. This podcast is, we're doing it best effort method just to help as many people as possible, and I appreciate you wanting to do this. And
No, I think it's exciting what you're doing. I think creating more dialogue with sales engineers is a good thing, not only within your company, but in other companies as well. Just to get more cross-pollination, different perspectives. Even at Box, the way I work, I've got a huge ecosystem of partners, and in the future, it may very well be that you're co-selling with another sales engineer from a company that's complementary in terms of technologies kind of interacting together. So I find these kind of dialogues really, really interesting, and I think you might be at the forefront of something that will be common practice fairly soon.
yeah, and I'm a sales engineer who works with equipment, a little bit of like software, but and we're gonna talk about your history and how you came to be NSE. But you work for, you mentioned Box, which is pure software. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, software as a service and platform as a service. We're born in the cloud, so obviously we run on hardware like mobile devices and things like that. But pure software platform.
Yeah. So I love talking to you because from my experience, people want something that they can touch, and when you're selling software, now it's a totally different ball game, and people are catching up.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to see the techniques. But before we go there, maybe you can introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you kind of a brief bio. It's nothing, too exciting. So, I've been a sales engineer since about, I would say 2008. Did a bunch of different IT jobs, but I actually came from the consulting, background. So in speaking with you a little bit earlier, just before the podcast started, I know you're getting a lot of questions on people wanting to move into sales engineering. And oddly enough, when I was working as a consultant, so I was kind of in a boutique Oracle shop. We focus on business intelligence and data warehousing for the pharmaceutical industry. And typical consultant kind of fly out Monday to Thursday on client sites, and Friday do a bit of a reset, and then next week kind of same deal type thing. And because it was a small kind of boutique shop, and we were kind of a premier Oracle partner, there still had to be a lot of co-selling, right, with the Oracle sales team. And the Oracle sales team kind of relied on us for deep expertise. And what we did was business intelligence, data warehousing, etc. So there had to be sales calls, and it was a small consulting shop, and we didn't really formally have. I mean, we had salespeople and account managers, but we didn't have somebody that would kind of show up and talk about the solution, our project approach, and things like that. And that's where I was kind of tapped on the shoulder, and I guess they found or saw some qualities in me through the various meetings that we would have with our clients on the consulting side of things. So just being able to kind of forecast their needs, figure out what the next upcoming release of all the Oracle features, and kind of position that, because in a way it was kind of doing that as a consultant. You kind of want to sell the next version or the next iteration of the project, right? So you kind of want to stick around and charge a ridiculous kind of hourly rate, and kind of make more money and kind of be billable from a consulting perspective. So I did that a few times, and it was quite successful, and we secured more projects that way. And then I didn't even know that role existed at that time. I thought I was just kind of helping out the sales team and kind of being pulled off projects, or if I wasn't billable, I was kind of doing some of that stuff. And then I kind of saw this whole shift, happening in cloud, right? And Salesforce was one of the pioneers, along, with Workday and logos like that. And fast forward a number of years, they're definitely a fantastic organization. I had the pleasure of working there. And my brother-in-law was actually working at Salesforce at the time. Surprise, surprise, I got a job through somebody I know, like many other people. That's why it's super important to network. But at the same time, there's a lot of stiff competition to get in, because the organization was the office was growing tremendously in the Toronto office, and I got in as a small business, sales engineer. And if you've ever interviewed to become a sales engineer at a reputable company, it's a very rigorous process, right? They want to know if you can speak about technology, if you're left brain or right brain, you have the technical know-how, can you present, can you articulate at the heart of it the business problems that you're kind of solving. So I remember very vividly kind of studying, for that presentation. And I've had a lot of that back to the consulting organization I was in, but I remember even rehearsing, in front of my wife, in front of friends, and things like that, of what my pitch would be when I came and kind of met the Salesforce leadership. And the rest is history. After that, I did well in the interview, and was fortunate enough to get hired. And thank God for that. I think it's definitely the right role for me. I love technology, but I love interacting and talking with people and helping them, solve problems. And I don't think I could just solely compete in the engineering space. Nor could I just solely compete in the sales arena, just being a pure account executive. And that's why I think sales engineering is for me, and that's how I got there.
Nice. So if I were to summarize the two key points that I took from you here, is that you were already working with customers before you went into the SE role as a consultant. So you obviously had the technical expertise, and then you worked with customers, so you had the soft expertise, soft skills, working with customers, and then you found a job through somebody you know. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Nothing too exciting or earth-shattering, but absolutely. But one of the things I would say is, I talked to a lot of people are kind of early on in their career, and I always say that consulting is a really interesting place to start because you have to grow up really fast in the sense that you need to be presentable, you need to be on time, you're interacting with clients, you can never kind of pause. You always have to be on your A game because you're a billable resource. So they're always questioning what you're doing around and how you're kind of adding value. And so that's always interesting, right? So I see a lot of sales engineers that have kind of that technical background and through time have kind of built those soft skills to be able to kind of be a quick thinker. I call it quick on your feet, right? So you're in a meeting, can you come up with that answer very quickly? Can you be concise and can you articulate your point, right? Because if you have those skills, right, if you can present the facts, if you can argue with them, if you can back them up on how your solution solves the problem, then you're going to find yourself winning more so than not.
Yeah, I had kind of a similar experience where as a network design engineer, I had to consult. And most of the people that I see that move into SE role have had some experience dealing with the human beings in a technical fashion. And you already mentioned this, a great thing is be able to explain some technical information to people who may not be technical or dig into people who are much more technical than you. So that's great. I wanted to talk about the interview. So you've been in SE with two different companies from what I'm looking at your LinkedIn. You're in SE with two different companies,
yeah,
Salesforce and Box.
Fortunate. Yeah.
And they're both great companies. They're both like, they're very, what's the word to use here? They're prestigious. They're known, right? So I'm assuming it's not easy. Everybody wants to get in there. It's not easy to get in there. And you must have killed the interviews in both companies. Can we talk a little bit about the interview process, not specifically to these companies, but from your experience and what it looks like in general?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the some of the guidance that I would give you or anyone looking to get into an organization. So many times in the interview process, especially, obviously there's going to be several rounds of interviews. You're going to interview people who might be your peers. You're going to interview the initial recruiter who just kind of wants to get a pulse. If you're a presentable individual, if you can back what your resume says that you've done, and you're going to get those initial indicators, and you're going to go through speaking with people who might be your peers, and then your boss, and then eventually senior management. But the crux of it all, everything might be going well into that final kind of presentation. So a lot of organizations want to see you present as a sales engineer in some sort of mock meeting. Now, I've seen kind of various flavors of this, right? They'll give you some sort of case study, right, where you need to figure out what's ultimately the challenge of the case study, and present a solution. And at Box, it might be Box, right? So I've seen candidates present our solution to us, and then I've also seen candidates kind of pick a technology of their choice and present it to us, as well. And I always prefer to demo something you really know, as opposed to trying to learn that vendor's technology and demo to them. Unless you can learn really fast, unless you've been in the technology space for quite some time and can kind of distill it down very efficiently. I think you always come off better when you're presenting something or a technology that you've been working with for some time. And that's what I did at Salesforce. I presented the Oracle business intelligence solution. I know there was a little bit of overlap in terms of what Salesforce was doing in the reporting space, but not a whole lot. So I knew to kind of where to delineate, and they were kind of stepping into my world versus me stepping into theirs, right? Because if I chose to kind of demo Salesforce in front of them, they know all the rabbit holes. They can kind of poke holes in your game. So if you ever have an option, stick to something that and you're comfortable with, and then sharpen the knife in terms of your presentation skills or how you articulate, etc. Because you don't want to be in that presentation worrying about, oh my gosh, what is the click path? Or I forgot to show this feature. Now I'm off script. You want to be thinking about that. You want your personality and your business kind of acumen to kind of shine through. So that would be kind of my advice if you're kind of ever faced with, choosing, one or versus the other.
So demo is usually like towards the last step, correct?
Yeah, typically it's been, where I've worked at Salesforce and Box, absolutely.
Okay, so first step, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, what I also recommend is through that process, don't just get the case study and work in a vacuum. Reach out to and talk to as many people as you can. Usually that's not against the rules. And you'd be surprised with the information that people will disclose to you, right? So more so than often, they're rooting for you, right? They want to see you do well. It's expensive to recruit people in terms of time and resources. So, they want to find the right individual and get them on the bus and obviously onboard them. So, take advantage of reaching out to as many individuals as you can, throughout that interview process, obviously without breaking the rules. So, figure out what they are first. But I don't see enough, individuals. When I talk to them, I said, please feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions, if I can help you. And not a lot of people take me up on that.
Yeah, I know that. So, but you're saying, like, let's say you're part of the interview and you told them, hey, reach out if you need help. Are you saying also, like, hey, find people who work at Box as an SE at LinkedIn and reach out to them? Is that not what you're saying that's not, I guess that's breaking the rules?
Well, yeah, it's totally fine to have a conversation. I don't think that's against the rules at all. In most cases, I just ask people to double check, right? Because what you're after is try to figure out. You're trying to figure out the company, the solution, and the messaging, right? You've got a short time to do in the interview process. You've got to kind of balance that with the current job that you're in and then everything else that's going on in your life. And sometimes just going to the company's website is not the best source, right? In terms of preparing for an interview, it is certainly a source, but you'd be surprised at the information that you can get from people, right? To increase your chances.
Yeah. So for my interview at my current company, I had like 6 interviews. I had a screening interview, then I had with my manager, another SE, field service engineer manager, director of sales, and VP of sales, and then a VP of SEs. And I didn't do a demo at all. When I talked to my manager after, because the next guy I interviewed, he had to do a demo. When I asked him, why didn't I do a demo? He said, well, you did. You just didn't know about it. Where he asked me a question and I ended up drawing on the board like a solution for them. And I guess, so the demo, sometimes it's flat out, hey, here's your do a demo. And sometimes it's hidden like within the interview process, the way you explain yourself if you draw on the board. So at least that's out of one out of one experience, right? I haven't done that many interviews to say that.
Right.
Demos.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Ramsey, because it's hard to whiteboard, right? If you think about it, you don't have a software screen or a PowerPoint to hide behind, right? Everything that ends up on that board is coming, straight from your head. It's from your knowledge, right? And you're doing it in such a way where, you're educating the customer at the same time. You're having some sort of dialogue and, you're kind of building this thing together, right? So, they probably thought, well, if this guy can whiteboard and articulate the solution, if he has a software in front of him or some other, diagram that's kind of pre-baked, he's probably going to knock that out of the park, right? That's probably what went on over there, and that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'll always recommend if you're doing an interview or even like if you're doing a discovery session, go up and whiteboard because you get people more involved than presenting something. But here's a question not related to the interview process. It's related to your job because I just thought of it. How do you whiteboard for a SaaS product?
How do I whiteboard? I mean, so it's just like anything else. I mean, you're in networking and, you've got your diagrams in terms of the solutions and, the network topology and everything kind of working together. And Box is a very similar way. So, if I were to kind of correlate it to networking, you probably have some sort of, appliance that acts as some sort of hub or service in kind of a greater scheme of things. And the Box is very similar in terms of, we provide content management services and APIs, as well as kind of SaaS solutions and kind of an overall architecture in a small business, a medium-sized organization, and even very large enterprise, where my focus is. So absolutely, we do a lot of kind of architecture and diagrams. If you think about information in an organization, 70% of your data might be unstructured, be it in files and in PDFs, images, videos, and that sort of thing. And that's even growing because of the types of devices we have, our ability for storage getting cheaper, et cetera, the need to kind of, share, right? So get into a lot of those types of discussions. There are some common denominators across, the companies that we sell to, because a lot of people have kind of similar problems and challenges, and we help them solve that. But then there's some that are very specific, right, in terms of the legacy platforms that we're either replacing or have to integrate it with because of recent existing investments or what have you. So that's a big part of it. That was one of my when I was in university, I had a physics prof, and the first thing he says is, if you don't understand the problem, just start drawing a picture, and on that picture, just write the data points that you understand. And sales engineering is very similar in the sense that, well, here's what I understand about your architecture. Let's get a dart on the board, kind of help me refine that. So it's very powerful.
All right, I'm glad to know that you can actually whiteboard with a SaaS. So if you're doing an interview, and by all means whiteboard, even if it's for a software solution. And you had a way better physics teacher than I did, because you're familiar with the term tell, show, tell in a demo?
Yes.
Yeah, so he did that very well. He came up to the board and he said, right now I'm going to draw a wave with his thick Russian accent. And then he drew a wave and said, this is a wave. So he did the tell, show, tell perfectly, but it wasn't really helpful. So, all right. So we do the interview. Generally speaking, there's a screening call either with a recruiter or somebody who will say if you're going to meet the next people. And then you meet a whole bunch of people. And then the last round is usually demos. Does that sound accurate or reasonable from an interview perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from my part, I mean, obviously, I represent a small sample of the world of sales engineering at two very exciting companies that I was fortunate enough to work with. But that's essentially it, from my part, and because we want to get a sense of how this first individual is going to perform, in front of the customer. And there's a reason why the word sales becomes before the word, engineer. It could be just an English language thing, but I always say sales before engineer. And you have to be able to, sell the solution, right? You have to really convince them that, your solution or your platform or your product or whatever it is going to help them achieve their goals or solve a particular problem, that they're facing, right? All the technical features and, the security questions that might come your way. And that's definitely part of the process, but ultimately those are things that win the deal. Those can get addressed when they need to get addressed. It's honing in on kind of the value proposition. And back to the picture, analogy, I kind of see, sales engineering as a bit of a Venn diagram, right? Just those overlapping circles, right? And, there's what you think that the prospect or customer needs to hear in terms of selling your product. It overlaps with what they know and understand about your product, right? So there might be a partial overlap. So you need to kind of educate them on the rest. So that, there might be a third overlapping, circle or oval or whatever it is on the Venn diagram on, how all those things need to overlap in terms of solving the problem that you need to solve, right? And you need to be efficient to get there, right? Maybe if you have 10 or 12 meetings, you eventually, educate them as far as they need to be educated in order to kind of solve this problem. But maybe there's something outside of that neither of you are thinking about that's ultimately going to convince them, right? And then, so that's why it's important to have that dialogue and come up with it together, and not just be the sales engineer. Well, let me get through all these features and let me tell you how great this is. it's a bit of a dialogue back and forth in terms of what are you trying to do? What are some of the challenges, right? You always got to assume that they know something that you don't that might be valuable. So they'll just get in there with your pitch and your features, and you have to get through my script. You're constantly kind of getting feedback while you're presenting, and there's verbal cues and there's nonverbal cues, and you better be reading those, and you better make most of your time. So I think efficiency is a big thing in terms of the sales cycle, because you're just like having a conversation with somebody, right? You might have a topic on mind, but if you see the person's getting bored, you're going to have to kind of switch topics and steer them back on the right path where they're interested.
So do you usually have 10 to 12 meetings in a sales cycle? Is that everything through discovery and then proposal, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I work in large enterprise. I spend about 80% of my time in financial services and the large banks, and it's very wishful thinking that you're gonna force your sales process, and here's all the meetings you need to have, and here's how we get to yes or no. It's a little bit more fluid than that, right? So 10 or 12 meetings is, it's very common, and sometimes it's really just you going through gatekeepers in an organization, right? So you're speaking to a director of technology. They need to be sold before they actually bring in their VP, right? So a lot of times you're having kind of that repeat meeting, and you're educating more individuals in maybe a different department or up kind of the chain of command, right? So you're creating a bit of a groundswell. If I could change some common terminology in sales engineering, I would kind of get rid of the word discovery call, altogether, because maybe I'm just being a little bit too critical, but discovery call sounds to me that you just landed on the moon and you've never been there before, and you're walking around kind of discovering things, right? I like to use the word needs analysis, because you should already have an idea of what your solution can provide, or the problems that you solve, and you just really need to calibrate with the customer with what subset of those are most important to you. And of course, it depends on the solution. When I was at Salesforce, I mean, that platform can be configured to do just about anything. And so, depending on the use case, I mean, it's sold into healthcare and life sciences, and a lot of that was new territory for us. So a lot of the time it did feel like discovery calls. But after we saw those kind of common denominators, we were able to kind of position more of that as a needs analysis. And here are the kind of the solutions that provide. Here's some of the customer stories. What challenges are you facing? And then, let's go down that path together and figure out if this solution will make sense.
Do you mind if I push back a little bit on this?
Absolutely. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and that's why I want to speak with other sales engineers, because I don't want to walk around and be wrong, right? I want to learn from other individuals, but that's kind of the way I see it.
I don't think you're wrong. I just want to play devil's advocate, because I like to do that. Just ask my account manager. But when you say, like, let's say it's a needs analysis, and you talk about the customer stories that you've seen, and then you ask them, what challenges are you facing? Wouldn't that be a discovery right there?
Yeah, it is. And I think it's really just the terminology, right? Because words matter. If you look about it, discovery is something that is for me, right? I'm going to go in and I'm going to discover stuff about your business, right? But when you say needs analysis, psychologically now becomes about them. This person's now in tune with my needs. This person's going to show up and listen to us, and then see if they can come back and present some sort of solution to our problem, right?
Okay, so
and it's a small nuance, right? But I'm weird, and I pay attention to those things, and I think every SC is a little bit weird in their own way. So if you're listening and you think like you're a little weird and you like technology, then that's okay, because I think we all have our quirks as SCs, and that's why we all get along.
Yeah, no, this is a very good point, and I'm glad I pushed back a little bit about it. Are you saying this is what you describe them as a meaning to the customer, or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I didn't.
Absolutely.
Okay, that clarifies a little bit, because when it's internal, when we're doing stuff, we can call it whatever we want. But if you're talking to a customer and sometimes the terminology does make a difference in the sense that, hey, we're trying to discover what your problem is versus we're trying to understand your needs. Yeah, no, I can see how that would make a difference when you're talking to a customer.
Yeah, and I think, and I one of the benefits at working at Salesforce, I was in small business, and that's where kind of my SE, that's what was really kind of forged as an SE, because I would have maybe in some cases six demos a day. And if you don't believe me, reach out to my former colleagues. It's highly transactional, so you get a lot about that, and you start to see things that work and what don't work, right? Because you have maybe like 4 or 5 important meetings a month, and you're in large enterprise, and it's going to take you a while to kind of see those repeat patterns. This is a lot of meetings in one day. But at the same time, in some of my accounts, I have to earn the right to be able to schedule a discovery call, right? Because there's those initial calls of like, why should I pay attention to you, right? And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of business development or the inside sales rep, or SEs don't even get involved at that point. But sometimes we do. It depends on the organization. It depends on the nature of the sales team. It depends on the focus of the number of accounts that you have. It depends on a lot of things, right? So you might think you're having a discovery call, but the person on the other side of the phone is, why should I keep listening? I've got 101 things to do today, and you're trying to justify the time investment, right?
So how do you earn that right to have a discovery call? Or sorry, we're going to call it needs analysis for the rest of the session.
Yeah, I think people don't remember a lot of things, right? Once they've interacted with you, and you can show up, you talk about many different features of your solution, but there's a lot of power in stories, right? There's a huge focus. We have a team dedicated at Box, and falls under customer success and the sales productivity that are tasked with just kind of going into our install base and just extracting those stories and why it was beneficial. And I think that really resonates with individuals. And now that we have a critical mass of stories, let's just say in a particular industry, people are always curious about what their peers are doing, etc. And of course, these customer stories have to be approved for public consumption, right? You definitely want to. Security is very important. Some of our customers ask not to be a reference for whatever reason. I'm sure you can imagine, what they might be. But that's one way we definitely kind of earn the right. Such and such faced a similar problem. They're able to solve it in such a way with Box using X amount of investment of their dollars from a ballpark perspective, or the time to value, how long it took to actually stand up the solution and things like that. So there's a lot of power in stories, and if you look on LinkedIn or any kind of sales guru website or sales productivity, a lot of people are kind of preaching about storytelling and the impact of that, and I'm a big believer in it.
Okay, that's good. All right, I know we're both short on time today, but whatever you said today, I think has been awesome. So we're gonna move on to the not so fire round, if that's okay with you. And because I'm putting you on the spot, I'm pretty sure you can't say no. So, other than a notebook and a pen, what do you think is an essential tool a sales engineer should be using?
Other than a notebook and a pen, essential tool that a sales engineer should be using. Are you thinking about a physical tool or an abstract tool, or?
I've had people tell me Salesforce. I've had people tell me their ears. I've had people tell me their laptop. So if I took one of your answers, I'm sorry, but no. The range is open for whatever you feel is most necessary.
Yeah, I think an essential tool for me, or kind of a practice, and it goes back to my kind of university days, right? You show up to, let's go back to the physics class, right? You show up there, you frantically kind of write down some notes, and the professor's 2 minutes ahead of you in terms of the talk track of what you're copying down. And in a sales meeting, maybe not that fast paced, but you're recording information on whatever whatever topics are kind of coming up. And I don't really care what your recording device is, whether you're using box notes. That's what I use, and I think it's great because you can get your team on it, you can share, and you can collaborate real time, or you're just using a notebook and a pen. If that works for you. But after that meeting is to kind of distill the notes down and synthesize it in terms of what that actually means for the customer and how that looks from your perspective, and take some time to digest that. And it depends. Sometimes it's beneficial to follow up and say, here's what we heard, right? Let us know if that's correct, if we've kind of captured everything, because then you're reinforcing that for yourself, but you're also reinforcing it, with the customer. So I don't know if it's particularly a tool, but a technique. And I'm guilty of not always doing that because you're running from that one meeting to another. But maybe you sit down the next day or a couple of days later and you revisit those notes and you figure out what that ultimately means, or how you can dissect that to your advantage and ultimately the customer's advantage for them to be successful.
Okay, so if I were to rephrase what you just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, the tool will be any note-taking tool, and there's a technique, the follow-up technique to it. Does that sound okay? Good. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also to synthesize it, right? Like, if you go back to your physics class and you rewrite those notes, then it's sinking in again. And sometimes you always don't have your notes right in front of the customer. Sometimes you have to recall that and say, our first meeting we discussed such and such, right? So just a way to kind of reinforce that.
Yeah.
So not only the follow-up, but just distilling it down and reinforcing it for yourself. Okay,
cool. That works for me. Is there a book or resource that every SE should read?
I'm not big on the whole kind of sales productivity books. I mean, we're going through kind of challenger training there, so there's some good books on challenger training, and I think it's an effective sales technique, specifically if your phone's not ringing off the hook and you're not getting 50 leads from your website a day. I think that's an interesting methodology. Obviously don't have time to get into it all now. But I'm a big believer in kind of changing what you do until you get what you want. And sometimes when you read too much on the theory, you feel good because you're reading about the theory, but then you got to ask yourself, are you putting it in practice? And then you can simplify that. You can look at what the successful SEs are doing around you and maybe put that into practice and see how that works out for you. And you don't need to read a 300-page book to do that. So I think it's important to look at what you're doing and try new things and see how effective that is for you.
Okay, so resources could be other SEs in the same business that you were in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people that have kind of cracked the code and successful sales engineering. There's a lot of good stuff in books, but the reality is you have limited time. So where are you going to kind of spend your focus and your energy?
Okay, that's good. Do you have any tips or tricks for time management and task organization?
Tips and tricks for time management, yes. Say no to meetings that you think are a waste of time. I get invited to a lot of kind of internal meetings. My time is very valuable. I'll always prioritize customer stuff. So, if we have internal meetings, and they're definitely important, but always question why it's an hour. See if you can make it down to half an hour. Defend your calendar, and you'll often find that if you push back, people won't, push back to you. And they'll really think on how they're leveraging your time. And so looking back on my career, I was most successful when not I just kind of pushed back impolitely, but I questioned, why we were doing things, or questioned the time investment. And so you have a certain amount of time in a day, in a week, in a month. They need to maximize, the bottom line for your sales team, and always question that. And maybe even go to your calendar and look back and say, how did I spend, the month of August, and how did that turn out in terms of, our sales or our throughput, and what was actually a waste of time and what actually moved the needle. And I think that'll help you kind of refine on being more efficient and working towards, ultimately your sales team's bottom line.
You don't see me right now, but I've been nodding pretty much the entire time. Yeah, I love that. All right.
Well, yeah, that's good. I'm happy get some confirmation.
No, that was awesome. I love that. I do that all the time. So, yeah. Before last question, what advice would you give an SE that you feel they don't get from anybody?
What advice would I give that I feel they don't get from anybody else?
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes there's this weird stigma of kind of the sales, the SE and AE or account executive, dynamic, right? And sometimes as SEs we kind of roll our eyes when we talk about account executives, and we say, well, we could do a better job in this and that. One of my favorite kind of SE leaders, I remember she said, if you want to be an SE, you got to be okay with being the number 2 guy in the room, right? And it's all about supporting your account executives, making sure they're successful, because their success ultimately impacts you. And I'm not saying kind of be a pushover and do everything that they say to you do, but try to have a good working relationship. Because I've seen people that have been SDs for much longer than me, and they have this knee-jerk reaction of just pushing back. I don't have enough information to get involved. But it more so being help me help you, right? I'm definitely willing to help, but I'm kind of struggling to find the data points where this would be kind of worth both our times, right? So there's a way to kind of articulate things and partner. So I have a lot of respect for my counterparts in account executives. It's not easy doing what they do. They obviously carry a much larger quota traditionally than SEs. But you're in it together, and so figure out a relationship that works. It's one of the most important things.
That's great. I want to add that you may be number 2 in the room, but if you're a good SE, you're probably number 1 in the account manager's eyes, because he pretty much can't live without you if you're good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's about being humble, right? Maybe you're the number 1 guy in the room, but act like you're there, and you have some humility. You're there to learn. You're there to be curious. This versus Mr. and Mrs. kind of know-it-all, right? So yeah, I agree with you. We're definitely have an important role. We see a lot of the because a lot of us are overlaid. We get exposure to the most complicated kind of deals versus kind of the ones that are just more simple in nature, maybe not require an SD, or maybe just require light touch to kind of get a couple yards and keep moving. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of really interesting and bright individuals as account executives, and I try to establish good working relationships with them.
Awesome. Hey, one last question. I know we're a little bit over time. I hope that's okay.
No, I might keep going. I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay. Final. What's next for you?
Yeah. That's really interesting. And if I stay being a sales engineer kind of the rest of my life, that wouldn't be a bad thing. But something that I always think about is how can I create a much larger kind of impact on my sales organization, right? So are there ways I can enable my peers that have just started? We just hired another XD in our Team Canada team, and how can I help onboard them, or how can I kind of help spread knowledge? And that's worked well for me in the past, whether that is certain playbooks, whether that's certain configurations of our SaaS and platform as a service platforms, and really just kind of enabling them and being kind of more efficient in what they do. As a sales engineer, for those of you who are kind of listening and looking to get into it, there's so many things that you can branch off into, right? I mean, at Salesforce, I saw a lot of people go into product management. That's an interesting area that I'm always fascinated in. Based in Toronto, it's hard because if you want to be part of product in a Silicon Valley company, you have to be kind of in Silicon Valley. But I think working closer with product, working closer with product marketing, I've done a little bit of that in my tenure, and sometimes SEs have these little side projects. I'm always interested in that. I wouldn't call it this is the type of role that I want to be in, but this is the type of work that I enjoy doing, and wherever that goes, I think that'll be a good thing.
Perfect. That's it. That's all the questions that I have for you, David. Thank you for your time.
Thanks. This has been great. I wish you a lot of success with this, podcast. Listen to a couple of them. I definitely recommend, people check it out. And if you want more people to interview, I don't want you to get too saturated with Salesforce and Box people, but there are a lot of great people that I've worked with in the past. So if you interview another, rock star SC, I know many of them that have influenced me over the years. So best of luck, Ramsey, and enjoy the rest of your day and week.
Thank you. You too. And the answer is yes. I want to interview more rockstar SEs, but I'll talk to you offline about that. Thanks, David.
Perfect.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye now.
Hey again, SE Nation. We've reached the end of this interview. I really had fun with David, as usual. I enjoyed talking to him, and thank you, David, for your insight and for your help today. That was really valuable. I appreciate it. If you guys like the show, subscribe, rate, review wherever you listen to it. Even if you have to put a note in a bottle and throw it in the ocean, if that's how you want to rate it, that will not help me very much, but you can still do it. I would appreciate it. So that's it. I have a webinar coming out next week, and it's going to be live, limited to 50 people. So if you're interested, register. It's first come, first served on the day. So even if 100 people register, the first 50 will be able to access the webinar. And if there's any other topics you guys want webinars on, and it doesn't have to be from me, I can try to find a resource who will actually do the webinar. As you can tell, I've talked to a few people. All of them are willing and able to help because it's fun. One, we enjoy it. We feel good about ourselves, and because we want to help. There aren't that many SEs out there, so we need the help. That's it for me. I have nothing else to say. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. And with that, this is Ramsey signing off.